Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel where we bring you the most inspiring and life-changing stories. Stories that light a spark in your heart and help you learn English in a natural and beautiful way. Today, I want to tell you about a man who was told he had no imagination. A man who went bankrupt as a young dreamer. A man who created a character the whole world loved, only to have it stolen from him. A man who was fired from his own company, with nothing left but a suitcase and a broken heart. But that man did not stop dreaming. That man took a pencil, a piece of paper, and a strange little mouse he drew on a train ride, and he built the most magical empire on earth. His name? Walt Disney. How did a poor farm boy who failed again and again become the creator of Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and Disneyland? How did he turn rejection into magic and loss into laughter? This is the story of a man who refused to let the world tell him no. And it is a story that will show you that the greatest successes often grow from the deepest failures. And as always, this story is a powerful way to improve your English. With clear storytelling, rich vocabulary, and real-life inspiration, you will learn while you listen. Now, let's begin from the very start. Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5, 1901, in Chicago, Illinois. He was the fourth of 5 children in a family that knew hard work very well. His father, Elias Disney, was a strict and serious man who worked many different jobs. His mother, Flora, was warm and gentle, the heart of the home. When Walt was just a small boy, the family moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri. Life on the farm was tough. There were animals to feed, fields to work, and endless chores to do. But for little Walt, that farm was a world of wonder. He loved the animals. He named the pigs, talked to the chickens, and sketched the horses with bits of charcoal on scraps of paper. His very first audience was a little piglet named Skinny. Walt would draw pictures of his animal friends and make up stories about them. One day, an ant gave him a box of colored pencils and some paper. Walt's eyes lit up. He had never owned such a treasure before. He spent hours drawing trees, animals, and the bright sun over the farm. Art became his escape, his joy, and his voice. But his father did not approve. Elias Disney believed that drawing was a waste of time. He wanted his son to work with his hands, not with a pencil. Sometimes, he even punished Walt for doodling when he was supposed to be working. But the boy could not stop. The pictures inside his head had to come out. When Walt was about 10 years old, the family moved again, this time to Kansas City. The farm was sold. The happy days of Marceline were over. To help his family, young Walt woke up at 3:30 every morning to deliver newspapers before school. Rain, snow, or bitter cold, he delivered those papers. He was often exhausted and fell asleep in class. His grades suffered. But he never stopped dreaming. At school, Walt was not a star student. He was shy and often lost in his imagination. One day, his teacher asked the class to draw a bowl of flowers. Walt, with his wild, creative spirit, drew the flowers with faces and little legs, dancing around the bowl. The teacher was not pleased. She told him, "Flowers do not have faces, Walter. You will never be a real artist." Those words stung. But they did not destroy him. At 16, Walt wanted to fight in World War I. He was too young, so he changed his birth date on his application and joined the Red Cross as an ambulance driver. He was sent to France. It was his first time far from home, far from everything he knew. But even in the middle of war, Walt found ways to draw. He painted cartoons on the side of his ambulance. He created comic strips to make his fellow soldiers laugh. When the war ended, Walt returned to Kansas City. He was a young man with no money, no fame, and no clear path. But he knew one thing: he wanted to be an artist. He found a job at a commercial art studio. There, he met another young artist named Works. The two became fast friends. They were both shy, both hardworking, and both filled with impossible dreams. The job did not last. The studio let them go. So, Walt and decided to start their own small company. They called it Laugh-O-Gram Films. It was the year 1922, and Walt was only 20 years old. The little studio was in a small, dusty office. Walt had no money for rent, so he slept in the office, eating cold beans from a can and washing his face in the train station bathroom down the street. He was often hungry, always tired, but wildly excited. He was making cartoons. He was living his dream. But the dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Walt was a brilliant creative mind, but he was not yet a good businessman. He did not understand money well. The company ran out of cash. The employees left. The landlord locked the doors. Laugh-O-Gram went completely bankrupt. Walt Disney was broke, defeated, and alone. He had failed. Not a small failure. A total, crushing, humiliating failure. He later said, "All the adversity I've had in my life, all my troubles and obstacles, have strengthened me." You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you. With just a few dollars in his pocket and a battered old suit, Walt packed a cardboard suitcase and bought a train ticket to California. He had a crazy idea: Hollywood. He would go there and start again. The early days in Hollywood were just as hard. Walt's older brother Roy was living in Los Angeles, recovering from tuberculosis. Walt moved in with Roy and pitched his ideas. He wanted to start a new cartoon studio. Roy, who was careful with money, was unsure. But he saw the fire in his younger brother's eyes. Together, they scraped together a little money. They set up a camera in a small garage. Walt drew. Roy handled the business. They named their tiny venture the Disney Brothers Studio. Walt poured his heart into a new series. It was about a little girl named Alice who traveled to a cartoon world. The Alice comedies were successful enough to keep the studio alive. But Walt wanted more. He wanted to create characters that audiences would truly love. And then, in 1927, he got his big break. Universal Pictures asked Walt to create a new cartoon character for them. Walt and Works worked day and night. They created a cheerful, long-eared rabbit. They named him Oswald. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was born. The audience loved Oswald. The cartoons were a huge hit. For the first time in his life, Walt Disney had a real success. He traveled to New York to meet with Universal executives, expecting to negotiate a bigger contract. He walked into that meeting room with hope in his heart. But what happened next shattered him. The executive at Universal smiled coldly and told Walt that they owned the rights to Oswald. Not only that, but they had secretly signed contracts with most of Walt's animators. They would continue making Oswald cartoons without Walt. The rabbit, his creation, was no longer his. And when Walt tried to argue, the executive looked him straight in the eye and said, "You are fired from your own creation." Walt walked out of that office in total shock. He was on the streets of New York alone in the middle of winter. He had no character, no studio, and most of his team had betrayed him. It was the darkest moment of his professional life. But Walt Disney was not the kind of man who stayed down for long. He called his brother Roy and said 4 brave words: "I have an idea." On the long, lonely train ride back from New York to California, Walt sat by the window and stared at the passing fields. His mind wandered back to the old farm in Missouri. He thought about a little field mouse that used to visit him at his desk in the Laugh-O-Gram office. He had named that mouse Mortimer. Mortimer was small, but he was clever and full of spirit. Walt began to sketch. He drew a tiny mouse with round ears, big eyes, and a bright personality. He showed the sketch to his wife, Lillian. She liked the drawing, but she had one suggestion. "Don't call him Mortimer," she said. "That sounds too serious. Call him Mickey." Mickey Mouse was born. Walt and UB Iwerks worked in secret. They created the first Mickey Mouse cartoons with furious energy. They put sound into the cartoons, something that had never been done well before. In 1928, Steamboat Willie premiered. The audience was amazed. A cartoon character who talked, whistled, and laughed in perfect time with music. It was magic on screen. Mickey Mouse became an overnight sensation. Letters poured in from children and adults alike. The little mouse that was born from betrayal and failure captured the heart of the entire world. Walt Disney, the man who had been fired from his own company, was now a rising star. But Walt's mind was never still. He was always looking for the next impossible idea. In the early 1930s, he made a decision that the entire film industry called Disney's folly. He announced that he would create the first full-length animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. No one had ever done such a thing before. Cartoons were short, silly things that played before the main movie. The idea of a 90-minute animated film seemed insane. People laughed at him. The newspapers made jokes. His own wife Lillian worried, who would sit through a whole movie of drawings? The bankers refused to lend more money. The studio ran out of funds. Walt had to take out loans against his own house. He was risking everything. Again. The production of Snow White took 3 years. Walt pushed his animators to their limits. He wanted the characters to feel real, to have weight, emotion, and soul. He acted out scenes in front of his team, crying as Snow White, stomping as the dwarfs. The artists called him a madman, but they also loved him. On December 21, 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in Los Angeles. The audience included some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. When the film ended, there was dead silence for a moment. Walt's heart dropped. He thought he had failed. And then, the entire theater erupted in applause. People were crying. They had never seen anything so beautiful. Snow White became the highest-grossing film of its time. It won a special Academy Award with 1 full-sized Oscar and 7 little ones. Walt Disney had proved the world wrong. The success of Snow White allowed Walt to build a new, modern studio in Burbank, California. He hired more artists, explored new technology, and produced a wave of classics: Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi. Each film pushed the boundaries of animation further. But the journey was never smooth. World War II halted European markets. The studio faced financial troubles again. In 1941, hundreds of his own animators went on strike, demanding better pay and conditions. The strike broke Walt's heart. He felt personally betrayed by people he had thought of as family. It was another painful scar in a life full of them. Walt took his family on a road trip, trying to heal. But even on vacation, his mind never stopped dreaming. He began to sketch a new kind of place. A clean, happy, magical land where parents and children could have fun together. He imagined a castle, a pirate ship, a fairyland, and a street from the past. He called it a theme park. His wife said, "Why do you want to build an amusement park? They're so dirty and tacky." Walt replied, "That's exactly my point. Mine is not going to be that way." This new dream was called Disneyland. But the banks and studios refused to fund it. They said it was a crazy waste of money. "You make movies, Walt. Stick to movies." Even his brother Roy thought it was too risky. But Walt would not be stopped. He sold his vacation home. He borrowed against his life insurance. He raised money from television networks. He poured every last dollar he had into the project. The construction of Disneyland was a nightmare. Deadlines were missed. Costs exploded. It rained for weeks, turning the dirt into mud. On the night before opening day, the asphalt on Main Street was still wet. The paint was barely dry. Everything seemed to be going wrong. On July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates. The day was chaotic. The water fountains did not work. Rides broke down. Women's high heels sank into the soft asphalt. Critics called it Walt's folly all over again. But the people came. They came in their thousands, then their millions. They saw a place where dreams were real, where a small-town boy's imagination had shaped an entire world. Disneyland became one of the most beloved places on Earth. And Walt had built it once again against all odds. In his later years, Walt dreamed even bigger. He began planning a new kind of city, an experimental community of tomorrow. He bought huge areas of land in Florida. But he would not live to see that dream completed. Walt Disney was a heavy smoker. In late 1966, he went to the hospital for a checkup. Doctors discovered a tumor in his lung. The cancer had spread. He passed away on December 15, 1966, just 10 days after his 65th birthday. The world mourned. But his legacy did not end. The Florida project opened as Walt Disney World in 1971. His brother Roy named it Walt so no one would ever forget whose dream it was. Walt Disney once said, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." So, what can we learn from the incredible life of Walt Disney? First, failure is a teacher, not an ending. Walt went bankrupt. He was fired. He was laughed at. But every failure taught him something new. Every closed door forced him to find another way. Do not be afraid of failure. It is just a step on the road to success. Second, protect your imagination. The world told Walt that flowers don't have faces, that cartoons couldn't be art, that his ideas were foolish. But he never let the world steal his imagination. Your unique vision, your strange ideas, your different way of seeing things, these are precious gifts. Guard them carefully. Third, work with passion and persistence. Walt worked for years with little reward. He slept in his office. He risked everything he had. He believed so deeply in his dreams that he was willing to suffer for them. Great things are not built by people who quit when it gets hard. Fourth, create joy for others. Walt's goal was never just to make money. It was to make people happy. He built a world where families could laugh together. That purpose carried him through the darkest times. When your work is about giving something good to the world, you will always have fuel to keep going. And finally, remember the mouse. Mickey Mouse was born from the worst moment of Walt's professional life. His greatest creation came from his deepest pain. So when you face loss or rejection, do not despair. Your next big idea might be waiting just on the other side of this struggle. Walt Disney said, "It's kind of fun to do the impossible." You, right now, are learning a new language. It might feel impossible. The words might feel heavy. The progress might feel slow. But that is exactly how Walt felt when he was drawing a little mouse on a train, heading home with nothing. He did not know that mouse would change the world. He just kept drawing. So keep drawing. Keep learning. Keep dreaming. One day, you will look back and see how far you have come. And you will smile, knowing that you, too, did the impossible. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or gave you new hope, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs a little magic in their life. And tell me in the comments, what part of Walt Disney's journey inspired you the most? I read every comment. Until next time, keep dreaming big, keep working hard, and never stop believing in your own imagination. Bye for now.